Welcome to the Rooted in Light podcast. I'm your host, Tuesday Rivera, and today I have with me Katie Belgard, who I am very delighted to have on the podcast. Since the podcast started, I have known that I wanted to have Katie on. And so here we are, almost a year later. Katie's joining me. Katie is a dear friend and colleague that I met as she came in to work with my husband and I with a group of political organizers. So I know Katie kind of very personally, but I also know she's kind of kick-ass in the organizing world, but that's not where we're gonna go today. We're gonna focus on we'll talk about all the things, right? Because we know that changing ourselves and changing the systems, they're inextricably linked. But we're gonna talk a little bit about goddess devotion today, and specifically around doubt and that devotion, because I feel like there can be an idea that if one is called by the goddess or has faith in a goddess or has a relationship with a goddess, then it's all kind of smooth sailing from there. And you just kind of go forward and love your goddess and she loves you. And there you go. That has not been my experience. And I don't want to speak for Katie, but I don't think that's been exactly her experience. So, Katie, okay, let me just pause here and say, what else might you tell people who are tuning in and haven't heard of you before? And what might you tell them about yourself?
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm incredibly excited. I would tell them that I am an aunt. I have four nephews and a niece who are like the light of my life. And that I am someone who just like cares deeply about my friends, my family, about the world. And I think that kind of is who I am and is part of how I've actually been able to enter, b my goddess
Mm.
practice and, have, like, this evolve in a way that has felt right for me even though, 2 years ago when we met, if I had had a crystal ball to see kind of where I am, I would have been confused.
Yes. Okay. Okay, great. And maybe even I always think if I would have known myself 10 years ago, I'd be like, "What is this chick doing?" I really would have been like, "I don't get what's happening over there." But so maybe you can bring us in a little bit, and tell us, can you share with us a little bit of your story about how you came to Goddess, what that looked like for you, what that kind of means to you now? Because I think it looks different for different people. And so just to hear a little bit about your story might be a great place to start.
Yeah, so I grew up in, rural New Hampshire, and like, when I was a teenager, started work volunteering on political campaigns. I had a high school teacher who said that I could volunteer 10 hours or 20 hours or write a 10-page paper, and I was like, "Sign me up for volunteering and talking to people." And from there, I was, like, immediately felt like it was a place where I could, like, have change and
Mm,
impact and just was, like, head down, both feet in from the time I was, like, 16 until my mid to
mhm.
early 30s of just, like,
Wow.
work, career, progress, and it's
Yep.
been amazing. I've, like, truly been able to be a part of people transforming, like, their material, like, status in life, and I am still
Wow.
committed to that. But when you say, like, my story of how um I got here in part because I had a colleague who I met along the way in that process who became a dear friend, and we always joke now, we're still very close friends, and Calvin brought me into to this here with you and Jabron, that we would sit and talk politics and future and strategy and what did
Uh-huh.
this mean about this elected official and binging C-SPAN the night before to better understand
Ah.
and staying at the office
Uh-huh.
until 10:30 at night talking these things,
Wow.
and that was just where my mind was all of the time, like,
Uh-huh.
strategy, how can I use this, like, set of skills that I've acquired to, like, help change the world? Um, and then a couple years ago, I got invited to, come into space with, you and Jabron, and I said yes because all of the people who were there are people I love and trust, but it was so far outside of my comfort zone, and,
Mm.
over the last, like, 2.5 years, I've, just really been able to see, like, a different side of myself and the world emerge,
Mm.
and that has been, really, really needed in this moment.
Wow. I love that. I love that grounding, Katie, because I feel like often folks think about goddess devotion, think about this kind of transformation that has the sacred at the center is quite woo-woo. And I know it can feel that way. It's a whole different language. It's a whole different way of knowing. I definitely understand that. But most of the folks that I work with are doing real work in the world. Like it actually matters how they show up because they're trying to change conditions for other folks, right? And so to ground it in this really deep kind of political analysis and thinking through in strategic mind, I could imagine it might have been challenging to kind of move into some kind of goddess devotion. And so, what can you say anything about that arc and what it's like for someone who thinks strategy kind of all day long to kind of move into a different devotional space? Or are they the same? I mean, you tell me.
Yeah, so I think the first thing I can say is that for me, um, I what you were saying about it being a whole different language and piece, like, that was something that for me was not a challenge in a, um, like, "Oh, I wanna fight these words," sort of things, but oftentimes I would just be like, "I don't understand what someone
Mm.
else is talking about here."
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
someone says they got a download or, um,
Hmm.
s of course, they're all leaving my brain at the moment, but these just, like, words or phrases that you people
Yes.
use to describe their experience,
Yes.
and I have a few friends, and I think this is part of when I think about doubt and why it matters, like, on the one hand, I think there's a very, like, shadow side of doubt that is, like, you're rejecting this thing you know to be
Mhm.
true, or you have imposter syndrome, like, I have so
Right.
I am a badass at work, and I still the amount of insecurity I have and that I know people can even like, the things I say and whatnot, like, that
Mm.
doubt is there, but doubt is also for me, it's like the access point to be able to trust the space and to be able to ask
Uh-huh.
questions and see things
Yeah.
differently and never have someone say to me, um, "Well, if you don't believe that, then you aren't, um" you're not welcome here, or if you're asking
Right.
that question, you're not welcome here. So I just for me, that has been a huge part of it is like I need to be able to um I'm sorry.
It's a we love dogs. It's not
She
a problem.
she might knock a thing over in the moment. She's adorable. But we'll just let her keep doing what she's doing and hope she does not. Um So, coming back, yeah, doubt for me is not inherently also just like a bad thing, and I think that's been a
Mhm.
big part of this process for me is like understanding how to hold multiple things to be true, and within goddess practice, even I think about how important it's been to me to not just doubt, but to have the space to ask questions and to have space for it to emerge for me.
Yeah.
So I'm not
Yeah.
sure if I answered the question there, but those are just like a few of the pieces that are important for me.
Well, I'm gonna go back and ask you and that was a great response. I am gonna go back and ask you for one specific here in a moment, but I wanna say that for me, your doubt or questioning or whatever it is that we wanna call it, for me, in some ways, it makes you trustworthy, because I am always quite suspect of when people kind of swallow things whole uh, or kind of like just accept without some critical thought, right? And I think in some ways I think that's very different from many organized religions, right? Which is why the goddess practice we're in that we do is not actually a religion. It's a practice, it's a devotion, it's a way of moving into relationship. But there's no expectation of kind of like this is how it is forever and ever, and this is how it is for you. I think, we talked a lot on this podcast about how goddess shows up in the way that you need her to show up.
Mhm,
And so she shows up in a way for someone with you with a strategic mind in a different way than someone who might be creative or find her through their active creation in art. She kind of shows up in the way you need her to create or to show up. But this idea of doubt is being welcome. And I always say to Gibran anyway, because sometimes he says that I'm a little disrespectful in how I speak to Goddess. And I'm like, look, she knows anyway. What am I hiding? I'm not hiding anything. So if you have doubt, you may as well like have doubt, right?
mm,
Rather than trying to like put it aside or, kind of shove it aside to go along to say like, "Oh yeah, I totally know what a download means." Or like, "Yeah, I get those too." Or, "Oh yeah, I'm feeling energy in my body too." Like if that's not happening for you, it's not happening for you. And if those words don't make sense to you, then like there is something about learning the language and like, all of that's important. But there's also something about I think this is about your relationship with the divine. And so whatever the words and language are or the way it comes to you is incredibly important. Now, that being said, I've also had a teacher who I said, "This thing happened and I need you to explain it to me." And it was really helpful to have her explain it to me. But Katie, can you just just to give people, because I think I've talked quite a bit about my practice on here. I've talked about downloads I've gotten and things like that. And I'll give specifics too, but I'm curious if you could give a specific, like you said 2 years ago, I couldn't have seen this for myself. And so what is happening now, specifically with you in a relationship with the divine that you couldn't have imagined 2 years ago? Just to give people a flavor of what your practice or your experiences might look like.
I, had, a recommendation given to me, to, put up an altar, and I just did it at the time. I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna just do this." But that wasn't a thing that would have ever crossed my mind previously. I'm
Mhm.
not sure it is something I would have done if I had heard it on a podcast or otherwise. It just like dropped in of that suggestion. And I was like, okay, I'll do this. And I did it. And then I sat there and meditated there and sat and wrote in my journal and put pictures of people I love there and created this space that was a just now has become this like touchstone in my home. And
Mm.
at first I felt like silly about it and I would joke or maybe not even joke. Like I have, I think, journal entries where I'm like, okay, it's fine that I do this and sit in my basement and this is real for me as long as I'm not making policy decisions out in the world based on this. Like I literally have that in my journal because this is so
Uh-huh.
real and central to me and it who I am as a person informs the work in a bigger way and it is still important to me that I have a
Uh-huh.
boundary for myself in terms of
Uh-huh.
how I think about this work and what I think about as like the unseen or the unknowable just because I
Uh-huh.
can't explain it with science as we know it or other things doesn't mean it's not real. And when I exist and live in the public policy making space and think a lot about okay, well what sort of things should we be having government or other choices be made on. And I think like my kindness, my curiosity, the authenticity, that is all part of like who I am. And part of that is what I bring
Uh-huh.
from the goddess practice. But also I fear, and I think one of the places my like doubt comes from is when I look out into
Uh-huh.
the world and I see folks who have used their happenings, I guess, so,
Uh-huh.
like, all
Uh-huh.
whether it's and ended up with the belief that, like, we should, build AI to solve everything and have, like, unlimited
Uh-huh.
energy usage for it with 0 guardrails because it's gonna save the world. Like, that is not where I
Right.
wanna end up with the, downloads from my practices,
Uh-huh.
and so I'm not sure if that totally tracks, but this idea that it's deeply personal to me, I can remember
Mhm.
sitting at my altar at some point kind of early in all of this and being like, "This is for you." Like, you don't have to tell
Ah, uh-huh.
anyone else about it. And it's yours.
Mhm.
Now being able to be like, this is fully a part of like who I am and what I do, and still be okay with it's not that I'm like hiding it out in the world, but there are certain
Yeah.
places where I'm like, I also think that I need to be able to separate the unseeable and unknowable from
Mhm.
what I'm bringing into other spaces.
Right. Well, and what I heard you say was it absolutely impacts you personally, your kindness, how you show up at work, right? It's just not it's like the difference of like letting your devotional practice kind of move you into your next self or your next iteration of who you want to be in the world, but not necessarily going, well, I got to download about what that policy should say. Do you know what I
Yes,
mean?
precisely,
So,
yes.
and so many of us kind of move through the world with our hands kind of or our feet kind of firmly planted in both places. And I know that we've talked about, how do you not let this devotional process because I mean, like cool things happen. in the process of devotional practice, right? Like like you see things and feel things and know things that are not explicable, right? And are, like you said, for you. And so it is easy, I think. It could be easy to get on like a head trip or an ego trip, like, oh, I get to do these things and I have these experiences and I had the bliss of the goddess flowing through me this morning. And, like that makes me special. And a question you asked me early in our time together was like, how do I kind of know this isn't just like egoic kind of look how awesome I am that I got this devotional practice? And I don't have a simple answer for that, but I will tell you like how I think about it is does this devotional practice make me better for the people that I love and better for the world? And if those 2 things are happening, not like better for me necessarily, I mean, I wanna be a better person for me, but if the fruits of my devotion are I'm better to my children and my husband and my friends, and I'm better at work and to the people I work for, then I'm gonna call it a good thing rather than here's this thing that I do. I'm gonna ask you another question. It's very elementary, but I can imagine that there might be people listening who are a little bit like you are and where you were. And even when you say things like, I'm gonna put an altar up, they might say, like, what the heck? What can you tell us, Katie, what does your altar look like? What makes it an altar?
Well, that's so funny because, it is a bookshelf that I found on the side of the road that I think was like an IKEA or, a Target style thing. So, the foundation doesn't have to be anything, extra
That's right.
special, it's what you make it, but it's in, the corner of my bedroom, and it has pictures of me and,
Mm,
people I care about, and items that are important to me at this point and help
mm,
me ground or remember things. But I think less of what it looks like and more of what it feels like is it's just a place
mhm,
where um, I can sit down and reconnect and feel, I guess, yeah, feel grounded, which and
mm.
feel like that's where I'm supposed to be. And it is a place that even though it's in my bedroom, sometimes I don't go sit there for many
Uh-huh.
days or weeks at a time. And every time I come back, the sense is, we're so glad you're back. There's no,
Mm,
even though the what is clear again and again is that like daily practices of being there, of meditation, of prayer, make my, um, life easier in many ways. There's
uh-huh.
never a voice that comes through when I sit down that says like, "Oh, you should have like shames you for not being here." Though
Right.
oftentimes perhaps gentle, perhaps not always so gentle because sometimes I need, as we've discussed, like to see a thing like 3, 5, 7 times before I'm
Uh-huh.
like, "Oh, I'm gonna listen
Yeah.
there." But
Yep.
always a
Yes.
little, like, cheeky and never like you because you haven't been here, you have somehow lost a thing in the waning days.
That's great. That's really great. 2 things. One is that, that that voice of the sacred is I've never once experienced it as condemning, right? It's just so I think that that's kind of an important like, we talk about, like, how do you know if Goddess is reaching out or, like, there's something there, like, if it's harsh and judgmental and that's not her. That's actually not her. She like you said, there might be some a little bit like, I get a lot of laughing at my ridiculousness from the Goddess. I get a lot of, like, "Well, that was, like, that wasn't right." But I don't ever get, like, "You couldn't come back here at any moment," right? That's
Yeah.
not the energy. I'm curious about you saying having to learn something. I doubt maybe I need to hear it 3 or 5 or 7 times. Would you say anything more about that?
I think particularly as I was coming into, um more practices and more of just having, like, really opening myself up to being spiritual, and I was thinking about this last night. The funny thing is I did not walk into any of this work as, like, an atheist or as I had a
Mhm.
very, like, I've never spent much time thinking about this. Who
Okay.
would I be to think I could know for sure one way or the
Uh-huh.
other. And a skepticism of some of the more specifics. I can remember a very specific drive in the mountains with a friend talking about crystals, and I was like, I don't don't understand. And in many ways, I continue to not totally understand some of the things
Uh-huh.
that get ascribed to them. But, like, what I do know is that there are items and objects that bring me some level of
Mm.
peace or grounding, and that's, like, a good enough answer for me, and if someone else has a different, framework of how they understand it, like, great for them. I can, like, respect that and also know that, like, I have these, like, deep connections to items and, like, that become, like, talisman and whatnot, but
Mhm.
that was a thing I had a lot of. I was like, "So you're telling me that this vibration from this specific crystal causes that specific thing?" Like, that doesn't land for me, but there's lots of
Uh-huh.
other things that do, and I can, like, respect that it doesn't have to be
Uh-huh.
mine. So I think that was a big shift. I remember talking to her, and I was being, like, pretty judgmental about it, and then at some
Uh-huh.
point, and I live in Colorado, I'm very close to Boulder and Nederland, if you know the area. There's a lot of crystal shops and
Yep,
and
yep.
interesting places to visit. So it was this shift from, like, judgment and, like, projection
Uh-huh.
onto other people's things to being able to be like, "Oh, not everything is knowable." Like, I can respect that
Uh-huh.
and, like, see where that's coming from, and then that allowed things also to open up for me of there then being times where I see multiple things in, nature, like you know, bald eagles, I see all of the
Uh-huh.
time, and, it wasn't that all of a sudden I had a moment where I was like, "Oh, the bald eagle has sent these, this specific message," but I was able to just after a while, I think, and said to you, be like, "Oh, like, pay attention is
Mhm.
because, like, there's just all of this stuff happening, and when you slow down and pause and you see, like, 5 eagles in a week, like, yeah, maybe you can, like, ask yourself what's going on there. I'm never probably gonna get a clear delivered to my front door message around it, but it is a
Mhm.
reminder to me to, like, ground into, slow down, show up a little differently when those things happen.
Right, right. Katie, what happened, or was it gradual? What happened that you were able to go from judgmental to, huh, that's not my experience. It may not resonate, but actually there is something unknowable or something bigger than what I understand. Do you have a sense of like what shifted in you to allow that?
A lot of people letting me ask questions about
Uh-huh.
their understanding and
Great.
not receiving my questions as a um questioning of their faith or practices, but instead of being willing to say, this is what my experience is and how it's been, and welcome that curiosity, I think has
Mhm.
been central because I never felt like
Okay.
I couldn't say, well, like, "What do you mean by X?" And
Uh-huh.
have someone, like, be like, "Oh, well, yeah, that's, like, a bit of a metaphor." Like, some people it might be super literal for, but when I say it, it means this, and download is one for me that for a long time I was
Uh-huh.
like, I'm but now for me, I think means different things to different people, but for me, it's like this difference between when something is coming to me, like, I'm a very analytical person,
Mhm.
I think you and I've talked about, like, I don't see visuals in my brain, like, the
Yep.
way that I compute everything is, like, in a internal monologue that is running
Mm.
every hour. It is words and words and words. So I'm always thinking and generating and
Uh-huh.
whatnot. So to me, it
Uh-huh.
became really clear that, like, a download or an insight or that is when it drops in and it hasn't been like, I haven't constructed the thing myself. That doesn't
Uh-huh.
mean it's not coming from goddess or self or somewhere, but it's just, like, clear and direct and kind. Like you said, it's not that, critic telling me I'm wrong, but it is this, like,
Uh-huh.
presence of, calm and direct information. And it
Right.
took me a really long time to get there because some of the language was confusing to me, and then finally, as it did, I was like, "Oh, yeah, I've had those yeah, that makes
Yeah.
total sense to me."
You're like, "Yeah, no, I've been doing that," right? I think that's often the case with goddess practice or moving into relationship with the sacred is often you can kind of look back and go like, "Oh, yeah, that was that. I felt it as an intuition or as a clear knowing." Um, but it doesn't always come I mean, like, I always say, I don't know if you know this, but I used to say to Gibran, like, when he was kind of pushing me to be like, "Oh, you need to be out there with some of this stuff and be a little more, um, forthcoming." I'm an introvert, I'm an only child. I've had a deep experience of devotion for at least probably about 10 years now, but I just kind of never talked about it with anyone else, and he was pushing me about it a little bit, and I was like, "Well, I'm not like one of those podcast girls, where like they get a download and they go to Bali and they find their life partner and then their job just like miraculously comes because they talked to a person on the side of the road." I'm like, I'm not that person. So we laugh a lot now when I have experiences. He's like, "Well, thank God you're not a podcast girl." Because once, like I'm sure you could share some stories here that people would be like, "What? What? Like, that doesn't happen to me. An eagle doesn't talk to me. A tree doesn't talk to me," whatever it is. But it really happens differently for different people. And it happens in a way, not only that you can receive it, but that works with who you are. And I know for you, you found a lot of connection in nature that feels like a place that has been like a conduit for you toward the sacred. Can you say any more about that?
Yeah, awe is, like, an experience we all can have,
Yeah.
and I think awe is, like, a doorway and, like, portal, like, into the sacred, and
Yeah.
I have the privilege of living like, if I walked out into my front door, like, literally onto my street, like, then turned right, I can see the Rocky Mountains from
Wow. Wow.
street, and the awe that those mountains inspired the first time I saw them on a bus driving to Boulder in 2009,
Mm.
and every time I get to, get to be deep in the mountains now because I get to take them for granted, the view I see from my, like, street, but they're just there, and they're
Mm.
bigger than the world, like, they're bigger than anything I can describe, and if you
Mm.
like, for me, there's a time and place where I would just be like, "Well, of course, this is I don't know what else exists." I don't It doesn't have to
Uh-huh.
be anything bigger, but, like, this is church, like, and that is how,
Yeah.
um at finally, I have a friend I love camping, I love being in the outdoors, and I have a dear friend who he's like, "Camping is not for me, but we also love concerts." A lot of the concerts I tell him and I go to together, and I
Okay.
finally said to him, I was like, "You know how you feel when we're at a concert? Like, you're like, that is how I feel when I get to wake up in the mountains off grid
Mm.
and see the, like, first touch of sunrise, and that is why I'm willing to, um, camp without facilities and do other things because
Uh-huh.
there's that feeling." And I was like, "I know that's what you get from going to concerts." And he was like, "Yeah, I don't still wanna go camping with you ever, but I actually
Yeah.
understand it now."
Yeah. Yeah. I love awe as a way in, right? We've all had an experience of something bigger than us. And like sometimes it's like, that's just the open doorway. If you experience awe, like perhaps you can uh find an understanding of the sacred in you. Not that you understand the mountain, but you understand that there is something bigger than you, that's something more at play. And for you and I, we have a goddess devotional practice, but I often said to folks like goddess as a personification isn't necessarily what everyone needs to have. Some people will never, you know, like find a particular deity that makes sense to them to be in devotion to, and that's okay. It's just as human beings, it tends to be actually, if I'm frank, an easier way for us to actually understand the sacred is to personify them in some ways, and to get to an understanding, get to a relationship because we can imagine a being, a deity. But for many of us, it's also nature. People talk about Mother Earth. There's something, when we say goddess, not synonymous, but almost synonymous with the divine feminine. And there is something, like the first thing I do with folks as we're looking at this is I talk about go into nature and see if you can find something that has an element of the feminine. That, we're so keyed into God as masculine, and that's true. And that's, one might even say the mountain is, a masculine face of God. Perhaps there could be lots of ways to think about it. But just to start to get in tune with the feminine nature of some of this world, which I think can be challenging. You nodded. I'm curious what you might say to that as a person who's out in nature all of the time.
Well, I'm just laughing, to myself here, smiling a little because I was remembering, one of the things that has been really important for my practice, and I've talked about it as doubt, curiosity, all of these things, but, um, in the lineage that we're in, there's not an instruction book that gets handed to
Yeah,
you of exactly how to do it. There's not,
that's
and
right.
and that is just true, and I talk to people a lot who say, like, "I just wanna know how to figure it out and do it," and,
Right.
I don't wanna claim, like, any, like, like, I just this is just my experience, but, like, to me, part of why this path and this lineage is so accessible to me is the more that I asked questions and the more I dug in and the more I learned about it, the more I found, um, direction to go inward and to find,
Uh-huh.
like, the answers inside,
Yes.
and even with
Yes.
all of the teachers you can have or gurus who exist, if you
Yep.
my experience to this point has been when I dig into the more esoteric, I'm a nerd and I wanna go read all the things, is like the answer ends up never being go outside and let someone else make all of your decisions for you. It
That's
is
right.
go and build this internal thing that allows you to connect with me. And yes, there's outside practices and whatnot. So that has been so important because if I
Mm.
had started and, you and I have talked about this, but, like, of particular goddesses, if like, I needed to be able to find the path on my own way and have questions asked and be exposed to ideas and see what emerged, and when I was early in, like, exploring different goddesses, I always oriented it, though, to the mountains, and this piece where you're saying
Ah.
too that the mountains are both masculine and feminine is that's my experience in truth because part of what made it accessible to me was I was listening and reading new things and finding places where people were in the mountains and of the mountains,
Uh-huh.
and that came through. And then I've had a very, like like Durga is of the mountains, like, these other
Uh-huh. That's right.
pieces. But then last summer, I was in the Grand Tetons, which if is or Grand the Tetons, there's one Grand
Wow.
Teton, I don't wanna get corrected out here. And um, I have had a lot of such a, like, powerful and strong relationship with Goddess, but, like, not that interested in anything that's, like, labeled as the masculine, divine masculine, etcetera. I was like,
Uh-huh.
"You mean I found this practices that center the goddess, and now the patriarchy is coming in and telling me I should explore a, like, male entity? Like, get the out of my face." And then I
Exactly.
was sitting in a parking lot because, like, your spiritual awakenings certainly should just happen in parking lots,
For
looking out
sure.
at the Tetons, and I was able to be like, "Oh, the mountain isn't just feminine, like, the mountain everyone's like, 'Oh, they're masculine.'" I was like, "No, get out of here." And then I was also able to be like, "Oh, that's the whole point. The point isn't that it's, like, masculine, feminine
Right.
outside of me, it's all within me, and it's, like, all within the mountain as well, and
That's right.
I'm just, like, talk a lot and that's long, but
I
I
love
get
it
think
though.
the thing I wanna share there is that it's, like, doubt, as I think about it, has been this space for curiosity. It has been that people say
Yeah.
to me, "Go ask, go sit and see what it means to you," and
Yes.
without that,
Yes.
if anyone had come to me and said, even the first goddess that I remember talking about, like, was, Artemis. You and I were talking
Uh-huh.
about
Oh,
and
right. Uh-huh.
and I reflect back on that because I went and learned about her after that, and she's this huntress with these connections with animal, and, um just this, like, really incredible, amazing story, and if I hadn't had that entry point, I wouldn't be where I am, and
Mhm.
she's not central to my practice, but she is
Yeah.
central to how I got here and honor that, and just being
Oh,
able to
wow.
come from all of these different angles and perspectives and figure out what your truth is, like, is just what has made this work for me.
That's great. I'm so glad to hear that. I'm because it has to, it's like we can move from what I would say mainstream religion and all of that it kind of asks us to just accept without knowing. But like we don't want to like replace that with this, right? Like we replace if we want to replace that, if that's even relevant, it's like actually finding what is your way, what is your path to her, what is your I
Mhm,
love that, Kitty. And I do experience you as someone who asks a lot of questions. And I think that that is the fact that what you just said, and I'm just saying exactly what you said, but I feel like I want to capture it, that you kept getting turned back towards yourself,
mhm,
back towards your own discovery. Not, "I'm gonna solve this for you, here it is on a plate," but instead, actually go inside. Ask the question, be with that question. That's a great question. Um, I think is, like you said, doubt, curiosity. It's like someone wants to give you a coat, but you gotta make the coat yours. Like, how would you stitch it differently? How would you make the cut, like, go along your body? How would you make it warm enough for Colorado or be a Boston coat or whatever it would be? There's something about really making this yours that seems incredibly important. And I also wanna say that there's not it's well, 2 things I wanna tell you about. One is that I was also in the Tetons this summer, and, I think that we talked about it. I had a direct experience of the divine masculine in a way that I have never experienced in my life, and I was like, whoa, not certainly that I have not been somewhat tuned in and, kind of peripherally interested, but, like I got my girl and we're good and, like he's a consort to her and that's kind of like how I like it.
yes.
Um, but I also had a very direct experience of the divine masculine in the Tetons. And so that's just an interesting thing to notice. Like this is why like you said, turn back inward. Go have your own experience. Katie and I went to the Tetons and experienced the divine masculine. Somebody else might experience something different. You're right, it's all there, but but it's all actually about your experience. So I wanted to tell you about that, having the Tetons, like, Shiva just came, like, so clear. I was like, "What the heck? What is happening?" I mean, all right, all my girls were, like, around him, but he was the central figure there.
And we haven't talked
Okay.
about this, so I'm, like, this is blowing my mind. Yes, yes, exactly.
Okay. Well, we're gonna like, off air, well, I'll tell you the whole thing because it was a really huge
Yeah,
shock to me,
yeah.
and I can't wait to hear what happened for you too. And then the other thing is, when we talk about faith, which is not a word that we've used yet, we've used the words devotion and practice um, but there is something about faith doesn't mean that, like, everything is gonna be okay and you never have doubt or you never have questions, I think there's like, an immature and I don't mean to be judgmental, although it's a judgmental word, that if you have faith, then you don't have doubt because you
Mhm,
kind of believe so hard that doubt can't enter your mind. Whereas I think that, in terms of our lineage, the doubt that enters our mind, those thoughts that race through our head are also goddess. And so they're welcome, right? We can not believe them if we choose to, but like they're actually welcome. And so there's kind of like this idea that when you have faith, doubt isn't part of it, just doesn't track. They're actually, if it's like, it's like superstition if you don't have some doubt, if you don't
mhm,
let the curiosity in, if you don't say, "Well, that's how it is for Tuesday, but it's not like that for Katie, and how would it be for me?" Right? So there's something I think that moves us into a more mature relationship. I remember, like several years ago I was actually had a medicine journey, and I was on the edge of a cliff in the journey, obviously not really in the journey. I was on the edge of a cliff and the god and a goddess was there, and I was like, "Yes, I am yours." And I took a running leap off the cliff, just like fully expecting, right? Like that my faith and my declaration that I'm hers was gonna be rewarded. And do you know what happened? Like I like splat. She did not catch me. I splatted on the floor of the cliff broken. And it was like, "Oh, right? Like faith doesn't mean that, like, I'm gonna get rescued at every point or that something bad won't happen to me or that faith is like, I am yours and I'll jump and you'll catch me or not, and I'm still yours. I'm still yours."
Mhm.
I don't took me a l Katie, took me a long time to unpack that or integrate that journey. That was a real hard one for me, although I should have said, it was the goddess Kali. I should have known she's gonna let me go. I should have known she's gonna be like, "Yep, you need to be broken." That is also my doing, but I didn't when I jumped off the cliff. But that one took a while for me to be
Yeah.
like, "Oh, just because I have faith or just because I'm devoted and I've declared myself yours doesn't mean that I'm not gonna get broken upon the rocks. Doesn't mean I'm not gonna, like, fully doubt what is happening around me. Doesn't mean I'm not gonna be skeptical at times. All these things that we think are antithesis to devotion, I would suggest are part of the devotion. How does any of that land for you?
All of it, and I think, we've talked a lot about doubt, and devotion, D words, and, like, discernment is the piece that comes up there for
Yeah,
me and how that is
great.
something that, you and Gibran both consistently reflect back as, like, central to integration and central to this work, and I recently had, like, an experience that, you and I connected about where it was, like, heady and it was, felt
Mm.
very, like, divinely inspired, and I was like, "This doesn't really make sense to me," and, um, spent a lot of time, like, trying to make sense of, um, and it what I wanted, but I know I wanted to be true in that moment was that this was some sort of, like, divine sign of things to come, and
Mhm.
that would have been really nice. That would have been lovely, and that wasn't the thing. And I think, that is, like, what I'll say when I get, like, really honest is that sometimes my doubt is, like, a hedge against becoming
Mm.
a podcast girly as you were
Yeah.
talking about earlier,
Yep.
and if you're hedging all the time, I've had to learn that that's, like,
Yeah.
not discernment either. Discernment is
Yes!
being able to actually tell the difference. If you're, um,
Great.
always saying yes, then none of those yeses are real, but also if you're always saying no, none of those no's are real, and so for
Ah,
me,
so
I
good.
as I've been, like, integrating this experience that I had and, um being like, "Ah, it felt so right in all of these ways," but very clearly in the, like, my feet on the ground, what am I experiencing in my material life? It was not right, and, like, it took
Mm.
me a long time to, like, think through that, and I, Saturday night, was sitting at my altar and, just doing some of my, like, practices that help me feel grounded in these types of moments, and I got a, like, really clear and direct, um, message, I guess I can call it, which was like, "Yeah, no, he's not it. He's not the person."
Uh-huh.
And, like,
Uh-huh.
it wasn't mean, and it wasn't, like, knock it off, and it was, like,
Yeah.
not the answer I wanted,
Right.
but I had slowed down
Right.
enough, and this is, like, the thing that I've been really trying to, like, integrate into my life is, like, if you don't slow down enough for the answer not to be the thing you think it should be,
Exactly,
you,
yes.
like, can't, and I have so much fear about letting go of those, like, reins. I am a control freak, like, through and through,
Mhm.
and even just allowing myself to get quiet enough for my own wisdom to come through and then have to contend with if that wisdom is different than what my methodical, strategic mind has
Yes.
convinced me is the right thing. Like, that is scary. And that's actually faith for me because what do I do
Yeah.
when I sit down and I ask a question where I know the answer I want and I get an
Yes.
answer that is clear, that is different?
Oh, that is so good. That is so good. I mean, you just said so much wise in there, but I just want to take away, yes, if you're actually in discernment, as you said, then sometimes the answer is not what you want. And like that's also how you know it's not just a head trip or an ego trip, or you just kind of that's how I it's funny to say, hey, that's how I knew to trust the records like, as I went into the records, and that feels like another kind of far out step for me personally, like, they would tell me things I didn't like the answer to, you know what I mean? And or I would read for someone, specifically my husband, Jabron, I'd read for him, and they would give him advice that I'd be like, "I don't like that advice for him. I'm not happy about that," you know? So so I'm like, "Okay, this must be real. It mustn't just be, like, my
Talk
egoic
about
mind."
surrender.
Talk about well, that's another one we could do. I don't think we'll do it now, but I just love this discernment, and you said staying quiet long enough or, like, slowing down enough to actually hear your own discernment, um, which feels like a great place for us to end today, and I'm curious because you just said last Saturday night you were at your altar, you were praying, you said, "I'm doing some of my practices that I do to get myself grounded," when this message came in. I like that you said message, not download. I like it, because that would be a way people might use download. Can you share with us before we go, any practice that you have or use to kind of bring yourself into slowing down or discernment?
Um, Journaling at my altar,
Mm.
is absolutely one of them. Um, and I would say another that is, like, less about maybe or maybe doesn't feel, as, like, in my face spiritual, but is important to me is, I have, I have a record that was, I've, you know, unlike every, like, millennial on the planet, I got myself a, record player during, COVID, but
Sure.
my dad sent me a record that he found at the house that was my Nana's, who I'm named after, so my name is,
Mm.
um, Kathleen Ann Belgard, and I was named, like, 100% after her, and
Wow.
I just have this thing of, like, you're touching the needle on the like, I'm doing the same exact thing that she did
Mhm.
and sitting and listening
Oh,
to it,
wow.
and that was one of the things I did on
Wow.
Saturday night as well. So, there's certainly
Beautiful.
lots in my practices that have come out of the lineage that I'm now, devoted to and other recommendations of teachers and whatnot, but also some of the most powerful ones are ones that someone else might not see as spiritual, but are connected to who I am, my family, my
Mm.
people. And I think if you're not sure where to start, that's where I would start. Is like, what is yours?
That's great. That is great. Looking back to our own lineage, thinking back like, "Oh, yeah. Okay, so that's part of our invitation to you, before this and the next podcast is to Uh, undergo a practice once or twice. Maybe you're gonna start an altar. Maybe you'll journal at your altar. Maybe you'll journal. Maybe you'll do something that if I think for me, like, my special person is my grandfather on my dad's side, and it just made me think, "Oh, you know, he had all sorts of quirks and all sorts of things that he did, but, one of the things he did is the coffee rates went up in the '70s. He's like, "Ah, too expensive. I'm never drinking coffee again," and he never drank coffee again, but he would have a cup of hot water every morning, which is kinda weird, but it's actually something I do too,
That's
and
so
so I
sweet.
can maybe do that a little bit more intentionally and, like, think about, like, "Oh, this is exactly what he did mornings after morning of his life," so I love that. Katie, is there anything else that you have learned along the way that you might wanna pass along to anyone just kind of as we close today?
Take it slow, be curious.
Mm,
There's no like how to manual.
yeah, yeah, amen. There really isn't, there really isn't. Not to make it real and authentically yours. Okay, so take it slow, be curious, do what do the next thing. You don't have to see the whole picture. I always say, "You don't see the whole picture, just do the next thing that's kind of, like, calling you forward." Thank you so much, Katie. It's been so great to have you on today. Um, those of you who are interested more about the divine feminine or goddess, will be running a goddess class in January. I think this podcast is actually going to come out in the middle of it, so it might not be the right time. But there are a number of resources on my website. Also, you can just reach out to me directly. We can talk about how to help support you into a relationship with the divine feminine. If you like this episode, certainly rate, review, subscribe. I hear that's incredibly important. But I also like if folks can just pass this on. Just pass this on to a couple of people who might be interested in it. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you, Katie, for being here today. It's just been wonderful to be with you.
Thank you as well. It's been amazing.